want?
I just need a TI Launchpad.
Can't you see I'm busy here?
Don't be held hostage by the board order. Go to digikey.com to find thousands of boards in stock, all ready for immediate shipment.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of Make Live. My name is Tyler Weingarter, video producer for Make Magazine. I'm joined today by
Swadia, Make's photo editor.
And we aren't just wearing these headphones because we are building a cardboard DJ controller today. We are also in headphones so we can hear our good friend and designer of this project. Get him queued up here, John Park.
Hey everyone, John Park here in my workshop. Thanks for having me on. This is a fun project and a bit of a blast from the past for me, so I'm glad you're resurrecting it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're always glad to work on projects that you design and work with you on stuff because you do a lot of neat stuff. So if you're not familiar with Make Live is the show where we build projects live on the air, and sometimes things go right. Usually they go a little bit wrong along the way. We have a lot of fun just building projects live. And if you remember, if you joined us last time, doing something a little bit different this year where we're building in a episode before the main project where what we're calling skill builders, where we took a deep dive into this guy, well, both of these guys, which are the Circuit Playground, which is a microcontroller from Adafruit, and it can do all kinds of really cool stuff, including powering this DJ controller. We have a couple of small demos to play with it. After last episode, I immediately went home and dove into the Circuit Python library to start playing around with it. And there's a ton of cool sound stuff you can do with this. So I'm going to show some of that stuff off. But first of all, we can't go any further without thanking DigiKey. DigiKey are our partners to this show. They make it possible. If you're not familiar with who DigiKey is, they are an electronics distributor based here in the US. They have every single electronic component you would need to build this project, to build any project, and they can get it pretty much to your door the next day. They ship really fast. They're awesome people to work with. They love supporting the maker community, and so you should do what you can to support them and get stuff from them. In fact, you can get all the components that you need for this project. If you look in the link for the shopping cart link, you'll get all the stuff ready to go, ready for checkout. So thank you to DigiKey for making this series possible. We're great to have them on board.
Yay.
All right, so John, do you want to talk a little bit, kind of introduce this project?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. So the sort of fundamental thing here is that I've got a Circuit Playground, and you can do this with the Circuit Playground Express. Circuit Playground is a little controller board, and you can see it here. I'm going to maybe switch my cameras. You can see it here in the middle of this. It's the blinky thing, right? So Tyler was just holding a couple of them up. And the Circuit Playground and Circuit Playground Express have some capacitive touch pads on them, which makes it possible to run either wires or copper tape, or in this case, conductive paint, from those to use as off-board buttons or an off-board interface. I thought it would be kind of interesting to build a DJ controller using cardboard, in this case, this pizza box, and the paint, and then triggering through MIDI some software. So these boards are able to talk USB. They can act like keyboards, they can act like mice, and they can act like USB MIDI, which is pretty cool. So most of this DJ software, if you can see here, it's got a bazillion buttons. So I've sort of reduced that down to a few that are more playable in an off-board setting. I can do a little bit of a demo. I'm not a great DJ, but I'll talk a little bit about some of the things I set up. So I essentially have two decks here. On the left, I have a song loaded. On the right, I have a song loaded. And I have them beat matched, so their tempos match. This one drives the other one. So in this first one, I can play it using one of the interface controls on here. I can also
so their tempos match. This one drives
cue
the
a
other one.
section. So you can say, hey, let's start a section right here that I want to loop. Or maybe it's a section that I want to repeat over and over and over again. So the deck B I'm using mostly for scratching. So I'll do a little demo and talk my way through this. So unfortunately, mine has been sitting around aging that isn't conductive. So Tyler's is going to be a much better demo of that. I just found this out today. I haven't used it in a while, but I'm going to hit just the pads up where the ink touches. So I'm going to play from deck A. Turn this down a little bit. And now I'll cue a section. So that section's going to loop. Now, a fun thing to do in a DJ setting is to subdivide that measure. So I've got one of these set up that it will now have that. And then you can let it play again and continue on. Another thing I have is faders. So I can hold one fader, and you might see it on my software. It's dropping a fader down. If I have a second song, or if I can scratch on this side, I can scratch while I cut that out, or I can scratch while it's still playing. So that's the basics of what I've got going on here. Now I can throw in an effect. I've got a flanger on there. And that. So that's the basis of what's going on here.
And the neat thing about this is that essentially you're just turning the Circuit Playground into a MIDI controller. So we're actually going to be proving this today. So you can use it to control any particular software. I think you're using Tractor over there. I'm using a free and open source software called Mix. So my controls might be mapped up a little bit differently once we get this thing built. We'll start plugging in the controls and seeing how different interactions can happen, and maybe get into the code a little bit and see how you can code different interactions and different inputs and outputs to make it work the way you want it to.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, it bears mentioning that you could probably run this immediately with something like GarageBand or another free synthesizer program on any computer.
Right.
If you didn't want to do DJing, you could paint big weird pianos on the wall if you want to.
Yeah. Fun stuff. So I mentioned that I've been playing around with the Circuit Playground or the CircuitPython stuff, And I'm trying to get this close to my mic so that, I should go to the close-up cam of the board here. Maybe you can hear this okay. So this is just, when I press this button, it's just going to play some different wave files out of the speaker here. That's a little quiet. Let me get my mic down there. So that's a fun thing in case you ever need a little push button thing that makes that Metal Gear codec sound. But there's another even more fun project that Adafruit came up with, which is turning this into that classic 808 drum controller. And of course, the other key part of this show is interaction. So if you have questions about this project, questions for me, questions for Hap, questions for John, put those in the chat, and we will try and address those as best we can. We're not experts at everything, but we try to be. So anyhow, I'm going to pull up a little bit of code here. And see if I can get this full screen. The text is really tiny, unfortunately. But this just is going to be playing different MIDI files or different wave files that are stored on the board. All I need to do is do save as. Just change this to .py, code.py, not 8 code.
And not PyPy. It's pre-thinking for you.
And because of the magic of CircuitPython, as soon as we upload the code,
And I'll move my mic by a picture.
we immediately get the sounds out of there. And the other fun thing that's kind of related to these, well, that's interesting. Well, that must be touching something on the other end. You can hook up these alligator clips to it. Well, it's just going to make that sound on repeat.
You'll want to reboot it if you attach alligator clips, because you'll be basically changing the capacitive antenna without recalibrating it. Every time it reboots, it recalibrates.
Gotcha. That's what I'm doing wrong. All right, so this will be a little annoying for a moment.
Probably only to us.
Yeah, so the trick is you can't be touching anything when you hit the reset. If you've got your alligator clips, you want to hit the reset button on the circuit playground and get your hands away real quick. Make sure the wires aren't running across USB. Everything kind of needs to be free and clear so that it sets that as the baseline.
Yeah. So I can attach a quarter here. I'm not getting any response to this. Well, anyhow. Yeah, reset one more time. Wonder if I need to upload the code to it again. That's bizarre. Oops. Now I've got it back in its normal bootlegger mode. Well, maybe I broke that. Wouldn't be surprised if I did. That was just intended to be a short little demo anyhow of some of the cool stuff you can do with sound, and that in particular is what you can do on this one, which is the Circuit Playground Express, which is the new version of the board. We did a big demo of it last time around with all the different coding options you can do with this board, where you can program it using the normal Arduino IDE or the CircuitPython or MakeCode. It's a really versatile board, and it's a really easy way to get started. But John, you designed this for the classic Circuit Playground, so that's the one we'll be working with today. And we've got this cool one from DigiKey. It's got the right branding on it. That's the one we're going to be working with today. They sent us these, and they look super cool. And we actually needed to do a little bit of unconventional coding. Or actually, we didn't. You did, John. Because can you talk a little bit about how this is working with the Teensy library and the
yeah. So this could probably use a refresh. In fact, it would be, I don't know where we're at with MIDI for Circuit Python yet. We have USB HID keyboard and mouse, and I can't remember if we've got MIDI or if I've used that in any projects. I think I've just done that in Arduino. So when I wrote this, the sort of easiest way to do MIDI, and that board had a 32U4 chip on it, which, if you remember, the older Arduinos were on the 328s, and those couldn't do this these USB HID tricks. So this that first Circuit Python, the Circuit Playground Classic, had the 32U4. So both the 32U4 and the M0 chips can just speak USB. However, the drivers, there are a few different MIDI for USB drivers out there, and the one that worked out the best at that time, which may have changed since now, so it's always worth looking at sort of what the latest libraries are. But at that time, using this Teensy core allowed some code that had been written for Teensy to run on this Circuit Playground. So that's what the libraries. If you look at the tutorial, there's a Learn Guide I wrote for the Adafruit Learn Guide, which sort of talks you through it and tells you which libraries to download. So looking at the code here, I'm just going to sort of run down real quick to where we're sending the actual MIDI commands. This command right here, USB MIDI dot, and then send control change or send note. Those are kind of the main two things you do in MIDI, is you send notes, which is like any keyboard note, or you send control changes, which is every knob, slider, fader, light sensitive thing, XY pad, anything that basically isn't even modulation knobs and things like that. Anything that isn't just a note is going to have this control change command sent. So any MIDI software or library for an Arduino or another microcontroller is going to have a similar sort of syntax, which is going to say MIDI or USB MIDI, send a control change or send a note. And then in our case, I've mapped the names of my button control changes. So capacitive touch 0, I'm sending the 0. And then I'm sending either a value, a 1 or a 0 in this case, which is on or off, and then the channel of MIDI that it's sending over. So MIDI has multiple channels, so multiple instruments can be hooked up to devices without them having clashes. I chose at the very top of this, there's a variable, I chose channel 14. I think that was arbitrary. Channel 1 tends to be what things are by default, so I just got far away from that default. And then it's up to your settings that you do in your software. So in our case, in my case, I'm using Tractor. In your case, you're using Mix. Whatever software you're using, you'll say, I want to listen to some MIDI device, and your software thinks it's a keyboard plugged in or a DJ controller or whatever. It doesn't know that it happens to be this Circuit Playground. And you can say, I want to listen to stuff on channel 14. And if the message that comes across is a control change 0 on channel 14, and it's an on or an off, then in this example, it's going to turn on or off the effects button. So I have the effect of flanging going on when I hit that button or turn that or release that button.
And John, I saw a question come in on YouTube. Actually, go back over to YouTube really quick and get their username. JK8 is asking, how durable is the capacitive paint that John used on the pizza box?
Well, that's a great question. So I mentioned earlier, mine has stopped working after probably 1.5 years or 2 years ago I built it, and just sitting in my garage with a lot of dust and stuff on it. So it's possible in software I could change the sensitivity, because there's a value that I was using to sort of clamp the minimum capacitive reads. So maybe that would work. Maybe I could reactivate it by repainting over top of it. I'm not sure. At the time when I built it, I used it for quite a few months, and I took it out to some different maker fairs, and it worked pretty well. I think the paint's durable. The biggest sort of danger point on it is I used the paint sort of like as a glue to stick my Circuit Playground to the cardboard and then run out to the traces. And since it's cardboard, it flexes a little bit. So I had one of those pop off. So I basically re-glued it by dabbing on a little more of the conductive paint or conductive ink.
Yeah.
And people wanted to know if it was the Bear Conductive paint and where you get it.
Yeah, this was, I can grab a bottle. This is Bear Conductive paint that I used. I think they are one of the few on the market.
Here.
And I got these on the Adafruit store, and I think DigiKey may sell them as well.
They do.
So there's a...
Yep, I've got a close-up on it here on our camera. You can see it there. Yep, you can definitely get this from DigiKey. I guess Adafruit sells it as well. It's interesting stuff to work with. It's very, not to get too technical of a term, it's very gloppy stuff.
Viscous.
I ended up thinning it out a little bit to get it to apply the paint on, which we'll get into in a little bit once we actually lay the stencil out and start doing the painting. The painting takes a while. I'm not going to do the full thing. I've got a completed one right down here. So once you see the process and get the idea, before you get bored and run away, then we can actually start getting into playing around with the circuit. But first, we should get into programming this thing. But you also, John, you also mentioned you were talking with people that have been using it for screen printing. They weren't doing that on Fabric, were they?
I think I've seen screen print on paper. I don't know about Fabric. I don't know why it wouldn't work, actually. I feel like I should try experimenting more with this stuff. I've used it mostly just on paper and cardboard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that addresses some of the other questions about durability, if it's flexible enough or if it gets brittle and cracks as it starts to dry.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that.
You know what's interesting is when these guys launched, there was a Kickstarter, I think, and they originally were showing a lot of digital tattoos. They were painting this on people and then attaching LEDs and stuff. And at some point, they must have gotten done some testing and led them to believe that wasn't such a great idea. But I'm pretty sure the name Bear Conductive came from them painting it on bear skin to start with, and unfortunately, they don't recommend that anymore.
Interesting. I wonder. Let's not wonder what the recommendation.
Don't try that.
Gets that. All right, so we've got our board here. It's fresh out of the package, so it's running the demo on here. Let's get over into our Arduino IDE. And let's try and make this a little bit, make the text a little bit bigger. And in particular, what we're talking about is you've got to set up the board. Actually have it already set up for this Circuit Playground Teensy Core, which you'll find after you install the board library. It's all the way down here. There's a couple of different variations. There's the Flora Teensy Core and the T on Ardu, which is one that I'm not too familiar with. Then we need to hit reset on the board twice to get it ready to accept code. And then, that's interesting, because normally we need to set the USB type to MIDI, which, because I've played around with this a little bit, it's already defaulting to that. Double tap it again to get it into bootloader mode. Set up the port, which it already is, and
Go, go, go!
actually had it get confused a couple of times and always want to go back into the bootloader mode, or get back out of that. But if we look at the board now, we can see it is running the PZ-1 sketch because we can see the sound reactive LEDs. So that is working well, and the next thing to do, of course, is start putting together our pizza boxes. And you've got your custom-made Adafruit pizza box. We didn't have access to that, so we went to our good friends here in the Bay Area, DNA Pizza, partnered with DNA Lounge, a nightclub here that they've been around.
Oh, so many years.
Yeah.
Yeah, since my childhood.
15 years or something like
In
that.
the current ownership and even longer before.
Yeah. So they have cool cyber-looking pizza boxes, and you can't go wrong with that. The first thing I need to do is get my stencil and figure out how to spray it with spray adhesive so I can tack it down. Not sure if I should try and do that here. Maybe I shouldn't. I think the last time I tried to do that, I ended up covering my computer with spray adhesive. So I think I'm going to do that back here, but talking about the stencil, I didn't have a laser cutter handy, but we do have our vinyl cutter. So I just did this out of craft paper here. You kind of see it, although most of the background here is dark, so that's not very helpful. Maybe I just wave it around, you can see all that.
Hold my hand behind it.
Yeah. So that's how that came together, and I'm just going to give this, I want this to be easy to peel up later, so I'm just going to give this the lightest dusting. That should do. And then
You can let me hold it.
of course we have the macro lens on the downward facing camera here, so it's not going to be super useful for seeing the actual application of the stencil, but once I get into painting I'll go back to that camera. Get this mostly centered.
Now we should switch to that camera.
Yeah. Where's a good place to start painting? Yeah, right. We'll start right there, which is kind of where all the exciting stuff happens. That's where the actual circuit playground interfaces, and where we'll be kind of sticking it down.
You'll want to hardware switch the camera too, though.
That too. That's what we're talking about. So this is, as I mentioned, this is a stencil for the painting. We're not going to go through the whole painting because you'll see it's going to take a little while. We have one that's already prepared for this, but just kind of show you what the process looks like. I've just tacked this down using some spray adhesive. I haven't used a ton of it, and it looks like some of the parts of the stencil have actually come undone a little bit. You can see here this Q one here. It's got
He flipped upside down.
it flipped around. That's what happened there. But you know, get a sense of what it's like to work with this stuff, and then we'll just move on to the one that we've already completed.
And these little black parts in here are only here in the traceries so that the stencil would hold together. So the last step after you painted your stencil and pulled it off would be to touch up those little breaks in the traceries so that you had a full, complete circuit.
Right. Good call there. Where's our paint?
Yeah, and since you guys have spray mounted it down, you could pull those off now before you stencil it with the ink too. It's up to you how you want to deal with those things. Mine was just so floppy if I didn't add those things when I was designing this thing that I added in a few little supports.
Yeah. But you know, as you get into like designing stencils and things like that, it's good to experiment with having things like that to keep everything in place.
For sure. Nothing worse than putting your stencil down and realizing that all the little parts slipped out of alignment, the gaps are too big.
I think I loaded up this brush with way too much paint, so I'm just gonna get it all around all these traces. Maybe this might not actually be too slow.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys on the stream can see how working with this paint, it's more of a goop factor than a free-flowing factor. But that's nice. That means that it won't move once you lay it down. So it's a little bit forgiving in that regard.
It does go on pretty thick, and I was wondering the entire time I was working with it if the amount of paint I'm laying down is adding more or less resistance. which I haven't experimented with this stuff quite enough to really know the answer to that question.
That's a good question. I haven't tried that either. I would think the thicker it is, the better. But on the Bare Conductive forums and their blog, there have been some good posts by people trying different experiments, like how resistivity changes as you thin it and thinning it with different liquids and so on. So it's possible that's been explored.
Yeah. Because, well, I'm going to move the camera over, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this control in particular. Again, I've got this macro lens on here, so you really can't see the full picture. But this is sort of represents the right deck turntable. And this is one of the ones where you programmed in like an analog control. And I would tend to think as you move your hand around the path here, it would work sort of like a linear potentiometer, where the further away from the trace you get, the greater resistance, the closer, if you go from a complete circle here, you would get different values. But when I looked in the MIDI software, or the MIDI kind of sniffer software, I was noticing I was getting what looked more like random values.
It's acting as an antenna. It's not resistive since it's a capacitive touch. It's the potential capacitive charge that you store. So versus the baseline of the antenna. So it tends to not matter where along that you touch it, you'll get the same values.
Gotcha.
But you can sometimes hover over it without even touching it and get values. When I was playing around with it, I was able to accidentally trigger things while I was just holding my hand up above. So I had to tune things so that I wouldn't trigger stuff by accident.
Yeah.
So some people just joining us want to know what we are applying the paint on.
As in the surface, this is a pizza box.
A cardboard pizza box.
It did not ever have a pizza in it, as far as I know. I think they gave this to me fresh and clean. I mean, this could be any piece of cardboard, but as John originally designed this project, it was a pizza box DJ controller, because that's just cool.
Yeah, and I should give credit to, I think it was Pizza Hut, sorry to buzz market here, but Pizza Hut had done a commercial a couple years ago. I think it was only in the UK, but it was around on the internet, where they had built a pair of turntables on a couple of pizza boxes and gotten a DJ to do some performances. And I think they had maybe a limited number that people could get if they went into the stores. So it was based on that idea. This was not an original concept. It was just the notion of, hey, they made a few of these, but what if other people want them? So that's why I built this.
I love the form factor.
They've done, and Pizza Hut, not to plug them too much on this, but they've done some wacky stuff like that. I mean, I think it was particularly for the Korean market, they made a pizza box drone.
Yeah, just recently too.
Oh wow!
Yeah, that was just a few months ago. I mean, now that quadcopter components are getting really, really cheap, they can do stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure it's probably still a meal that that meal box probably set you back at maybe $100 or something like that. But still, that's a quadcopter in a pizza box.
Wow.
I don't think it could actually carry the pizza.
Darn.
We're not there with technology just yet.
So close. So, Kevin McLeod asked if this paint can be diluted. So, Tyler, did you want to speak to that?
Yes, it can be. However, I don't know if that. So this is actually pretty diluted from what I originally started with, because I was just really too. Again, to use this word, pretty gloppy and tricky to work with. And I was really worried about it building up too much. If you look here, I haven't been super careful with it, as I'm being not super careful with my brush as I move the camera. Get in close on where I started painting here. Get the camera focused here. Apologies for that. I don't know how well it reads on camera, but I've got a little bit of paint buildup between where it's supposed to be on the cardboard and then on the mask here. And what I'm really worried about when I'm pulling this up is that when I'm pulling the mask off, that it also just lifts the paint right off the cardboard. So I was really trying to avoid stuff like that, and thinning it down with water definitely seemed to help with that. What I don't know is what, I haven't been scientific about it to figure out how thinning it out might affect the conductive properties of it. And John, this is where you just recently mentioned that it's not actually conductive until it dries.
Yeah, that's weird. I don't know why, but it is. It's that's something that they mention on their tutorials. By the way, there's a very good, I can't post links in our YouTube chat, but there's a Conductive on their site. It's a little tutorial and blog post about dilution, and they say, yeah, you can dilute it. As you dilute it, you're going to decrease the conductivity because it's a ratio of these conductive particles suspended in a water-based solution. But it's definitely something that you can do for different types of results.
Yeah, and I don't know how much this has an effect on that. But again, I'm going to move this camera over to another part here. This stuff actually dries pretty fast. We'll go back to the tabletop camera here. These, I mean, I wouldn't believe that, these already dry to the touch. I wouldn't say it's 100% dry. There's probably still some paint underneath that's still drying out. But I was having the issue of the stuff was drying out in the pot as I was painting it. So I needed to keep thinning it out. So maybe I'm affecting the resistance values, maybe not. I don't know. I need to be more scientific about this to answer those questions better. But what
I want to show right here, though, is look at how nice it's drying. Like, we were very liberal in glooping it on there, and it cures so beautifully that at the end of this, no matter how messy you may have put it on, it looks really fantastic.
I think that's just because I actually did a decent job there. I mean, there's some stuff that's still pretty gloppy here. I'm going to finish up with this one. I don't know. Should we try and do a lift of the
big mask? Big reveal.
I mean, this isn't going to be too big of an exciting reveal, but then we'll just move on to the one I've already pre-built, so you don't have to sit here and wait for me to do all this painting. And then we can start getting into programming it for the software I have set up, which is called Mix, and then we can start playing around with this thing. I'm being super not careful with this stencil either.
It's holding up pretty well.
So that's what yours might look like if you're doing this at home. Move this around a little bit. Of course, yours would be much more complete because you wouldn't be bailing out on it early like I am. So that's how the mask works. And of course, you can design these yourself if you have access to a vinyl cutter, which if you can get your hands on one, you should, because those tools are amazing. But anyhow.
And also a laser cutter, and there are other stencil cutting options too.
Laser cutters are good too. Here's our completed one. But laser cutters are a lot more expensive, and I find that a lot of the things you can do, I've got this upside down, a lot of the things you can do with a laser cutter, you can do on a vinyl cutter with a little bit more work and a lot less money. A lot of things like making stencils and cool stuff like that. Of course, you can't cut wood with a...
So close. And you can't cut acrylic yet either, but, fingers crossed, better blades.
Yeah. So anyhow, here's our completed PZ-1 DJ controller. Let's get this connected to our computer so we can start making sounds with it. Get this lined up on camera here. Get the camera nudged over. Just seal up this conductive paint too. And John, in your video that you had, you actually were using more like a paint pen kind of thing. How is that as an applicator for this stuff?
I'm trying to remember. So for most of it, I used a stenciling brush, which is short bristles, and you stencil by stabbing down on top, and that helps keep the bristles from going under the stencil. So it's one way to get real nice, neat lines is with a proper stenciling brush. So I did most of it with that, and then I had a little tube applicator, which I used when I was dabbing on my blobs of essentially glue to glue the circuit playground down. Those leave a thick, like an, I don't know, 1/16 of an inch bead of toothpaste like bare conductive. So it's I wouldn't use it for this. It's better to get the little pot of it and a brush.
Okay. Yeah, from the video, it looked like you had a pen that was loaded up with like almost like a sponge tip sort of thing.
Well, I'll have to re-watch my video. I don't remember that. It's possible.
But maybe that's probably what you meant when you said you were using that stenciling brush.
It might have been. Yeah.
All right, so going back to the board here, like you mentioned, I have these sort of anchored down with just blobs of paint to kind of glue it in place, sort of like you mentioned. And now let's get over to our DJ software. Where did I leave it? Did I close it? No, it was just hiding from me. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger.
And we're using this DJ software called Mix.
Mix. That's a mix with 3 X's.
That's how you know it's good.
And it, in addition to being pretty full-featured, I don't know how it. I am not a good DJ, nor am I well versed at DJing. But this seems pretty compelling. And the best thing about it is that it is free and open source. So that's why I ended up using it for this project. And of course, the first thing we need to do, and hopefully we can get this clear enough, is we need to set up our controller. And actually, we might need to relaunch this software because I plugged it in after. Maybe I need to tell it enabled. No, it's still not pulling up the learning wizard.
It might be an interesting thing to show the MIDI input software, the utility that shows raw values coming through.
Yeah, maybe let's take a look at that first.
What's that thing called? I forget its name now.
I grabbed this one called MIDI Monitor.
That's the one. Yep.
And we'll try and make this interface as big as possible. Open up our sources, MIDI sources. Yeah, unfortunately, the interface, and this really just kind of works like a data logger. Let's see if I can get a sort of picture-in-picture thing going here. So you can see what I'm doing on the circuit playground and how it's turning into code. Go back to us here so you can see me fumbling around with my switching software. Let's see, we want that camera.
And I'll just take this moment to say, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the YouTube chat or the Facebook chat, depending on where you're watching us, and we will answer them for you. I'm hiding behind this giant window.
Let's make that smaller. Maybe a little bigger. All right, and go back to our code here. So now you can see what my hands are doing on the circuit playground, and you can sort of see different interactions you get. So this touchpad 12 is working like sort of like an on-off switch. You see it's sending value 127 when I touch it and release it. It goes back to 0. Some of the other ones here, this is just a digital 1 and 0. Pad 6, which we were talking about earlier, which is this scratch pad, is really just kind of sending a pretty wild stream of numbers. You probably can't see it because the text is really tiny, but it's kind of, well, now it's sort of climbing up through the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Kind of still at random, poking around, went back down to 20s.
If I lifted my finger off, and now it's back in the high 20s, 30s, and steadily climbing up. And we can see, and of course we also have access to the push buttons on here. Those introduce different values, they're digital values. I think I'm going to set those up to be my play and pause for deck A and deck B. And I've got this pad down here that's like, I think I'm going to use that to turn looping on and off. Getting this crossfader was an interesting one, because one of these seems like it's set up to be like an analog control, the other less so, but it ended up being sort of a digital switch to switch between deck A and deck B, of which one is actually playing through. So that's a quick look at the MIDI monitor, so you can get a sense of what kind of outputs you're getting from the touchpads, and then see what kind of ways you can plug that into your software. Of course, we've got to close that because that's grabbing the attention of the MIDI device. Also worth mentioning that this Circuit Playground is the first MIDI device I've ever used. I don't know how I got this far in life without ever using a MIDI device.
Yeah, I can't imagine that, but my best friend has a dog named MIDI, so.
This is, yeah. Get that Circuit Playground off. Well, actually, maybe that'll be useful later on. Yeah, I mean, even when I first got aware of playing around with computers, and I was playing around with music, and I really wanted to get my hands on MIDI stuff, I never had the opportunity to. One of these days, I want to get myself a digital drum kit, mostly just so I could get back to practicing drums in San Francisco, because I still have my acoustic drum set, but those are loud and make your neighbors sad. So we are looking at our DJ software here, and we're going to go into the preferences and find our controllers. Now it says Circuit Playground is bold, so that probably means it's able to detect it and read inputs from it. And I'm going to say first control I want to set up is starting this good old play pause on deck A, and then we go to learn, and then we just touch the control that we want to do. Let's get that picture-in-picture going back here again. And yeah, I just want to use this tactile switch there. We can set a couple of settings here, but I don't have a track set up yet for deck A. Let's get that going. I'm not sure if we can hear that. I might need to go back into my preferences, but this all looks like it's working. Oh, there it is.
Yay!
That's working the way we want it to. We can go to learn another. You can also pull down for a menu, but I'm just going to go straight to the controls in the interface. Let's get a song queued up on deck B. Rewound that a little bit.
Nice. Nicely done.
Hooray! That's interesting. I think I might have accidentally remapped the controller. Oh, yep, that was... Thought I wanted to play reverse.
Yeah, I will say the mapping process can be pretty painstaking and finicky, and it's especially when you're using a mode like you are, where it asks for you to just do a thing and it'll map that. It's kind of easy to mess yourself up, so it takes some time. You're brave doing it live on the air, but it takes It takes some doing, and then you can save your settings, and you can actually copy and paste them around. There's a little, usually a little preference file of these mappings that you'll carry around with you.
Let's see what else. Might have some stuff pre-set up before. I think I still need to set up my crossfader so I can switch between the tracks. But I do have this, move the camera over a little bit here. So that's working sort of like a scratch pad. I mean, really it's just a momentary switch to play the track in reverse a little bit while I'm having it held down. But it works pretty well for that. And I have a couple other set up here. This will set up a 16-bar loop. So now we're going to be looping on this segment of the song forever. I have the same thing set up on deck B, and then I have put the same track on both decks. That's the kind of DJ I am. A not very good one.
I feel like I've had this dream before.
Oh, it probably won't let me replace it because I'm currently playing. There we go. And it does nice things like automatically syncing up the tracks for you.
This is when you're on the speed level.
And because of that randomized playback, I am getting some interesting behavior from this right deck turntable. But it's working kind of like a very rapid fire play pause, which kind of gives a little bit of a scratch effect. But this is where you want to play around with the software. Get a loop going on there too, so we don't run out of the end of the track. And of course, we also need to set up some effect triggers. This is really important. And I need to set up a really peculiar one for this. We'll just keep this going while I open up the preferences again. In particular, and I've got, and if you stick with me after this, that is how I know that you love this show.
Now you're a real DJ.
Now that's a thing we've done now. We can't take that back. Down a little bit, and well, I wouldn't really consider myself too much of a successful DJ, given that I just started learning how to do this stuff earlier this week. But that's about the extent of my DJ skills. John, do you have anything you'd want to share with us? Any of your tracks?
Yeah, I mean, I've played all my tricks already at the beginning, but you know, I think one of the interesting things about this project is that it shows the possibility of creating interesting interfaces really inexpensively. You know, you don't need to have preset a stencil for this if you want to just free-form paint and make blocks where you want to make them, and it doesn't necessarily have to be for music making in MIDI. It could be any kind of USB inputs. You know, for example, camera switchers. I use this button box that I built that's arcade buttons, but I could do the exact same thing with a paint interface. And so I think that that's one of the kind of key takeaways from this is not that you necessarily want to be a pizza box DJ, but that making interfaces that suit exactly what you want to do are definitely possible. And, we've got a limitation of, just a handful of capacitive touch sensors that we can use on here, but you can also get add-on capacitive touch boards and do many of these types of traces for your own interfaces. So I think that's one of the things I hope people take away from this is that you can play around and really customize things without having to mill PCBs, without having to sort of be weighed down by physical constraints of real switches and levers and buttons and sliders and knobs. You can invent it yourself with just some paint.
So Cast Pixel had a really cool question, which is how would you go about making these traces tactile? And is there a way that you could use out-of-the-box solutions to add buttons or actual tactile feedback to the pizza box?
Oh yeah, that's an interesting one. I think if you wanted to do things like haptic feedback, you could add motors into something like this so that when you touch one of these capacitive pads, you could spin a tiny motor for some feedback. That type of tactile is definitely possible. One of the great advantages of real knobs and sliders is you can look at them and see where their values are in an absolute sense, which is not possible with this type of an interface or even some of the more modern ribbon controller and touch interfaces and things that you'll see. So, I think you could probably also, this may not be what you mean by tactile, but you probably could add sand or other materials to the paint to give yourself an actual feel that feels different in an area versus the whole surface basically feels the same right now.
And I think also probably some of the wearable stuff, they have those potentiometers and stuff that are flexible. You could probably weave those somehow into the cardboard box as well.
Yeah, and I mean this is looking at the capacitive traces on here. And unfortunately, I just put the top-down camera away because we're kind of wrapping up the show. But these are just These are just control interfaces. You can connect any sort of input into these to interface with this, and then this can just send that control to the computer. We just posted a story earlier this week about a guy who created his own game controller for a paragliding game he's created. And he designed and 3D printed it, but all the controls came from a mixing console, an audio mixing console that he gutted. So he had all these big linear sliders and knobs and big chunky switches. And I think he was using an Arduino Micro or something like that. But really, you could just as easily use this, and that's a completely different set of tactile feedback. But if you've ever used a mixing console before, those are big, weighty sliders. They feel really good in your hand. And as soon as I saw that, first I wanted to check Craigslist for a curb alert for a mixing console to do the same thing. And then I was thinking, man, that's got to be the best feeling game controller in the world, just because those consoles have big, heavy sliders, and they just have a really good tactile feel to them.
And we're big fans of ripping apart old electronics and repurposing them for the project that you want to make.
Yeah. The thing I'd want to work into a project, I wouldn't really want to gut a video mixing console because I probably want to use it to mix video. But the best part of those is the T-bar, which is the big handle slider thing that you use to change scenes. I just have a virtual one here. You can use to
it's not as
fade from us to John and back. It's just a virtual slider on a screen, but that's just because of the software I'm using. But if you have access to a physical one, those are fun to use. They like them so much that I think that was the prop that was used in Star Wars, the original Star Wars, to fire the Death Star laser.
And Cedar Grove had a good suggestion about conductive foam, because the person said that the resistance can vary with pressure.
I've never heard of conductive
So
foam.
we're going to be getting into that next week.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of conductive foam, John?
Yes, very cool stuff.
Neat. Yeah, I would love to play around with that stuff. Unless you had any more you wanted to play for us, I think we're otherwise pretty much wrapped up here. Once again, I want to thank DigiKey for making this show possible. If you're, again, to recap who they are, DigiKey is an electronics distributor of electronic components. basically anything you need to make this project, anything you need to make your next project, anything you need to make any electronics project out there, whether you need an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi or a circuit playground or just all the resistors and capacitors you need for your discrete components, they have it. They will get it to you. I think it's too late for you to put in an order now and have it on your door tomorrow, but maybe, because they ship fast and they have a absurdly late cutoff time for same-day shipments. They're wonderful to work with. They are empowering the maker movement is super important to them. They love working with us. We love working with them. And they're awesome partners to work with, and we cannot thank them enough. Of course, we can't thank John Park enough for joining us today and talking us through this project that he created. And I think he's got going to play us out a little bit here.
I have 2 things to mention before we go. One, Maker Faire tickets, get them while they're hot. Come visit us at Bay Area Maker Faire. We will both be there. John also may be there. I'm not sure of his travel schedule, but we will definitely be there. We want to see you there. You definitely do not want to miss this show. And also, we have Make, the new issue, is on shelves right now. As of, I believe, tomorrow morning is the day that you will for sure see the switch over. This is volume 62. It's near and dear to my heart. This is the Cyberpunk issue, and we are really excited by it. So go pick up a copy and then write us in, tell us how you liked it.
Yeah, and I think that's all the things that's going on right now. Yeah, you already mentioned Maker Faire. Get your tickets. That is in May 18th through the 20th. If you get into town early and you're around Thursday night, our neighbors at the Exploratorium are hosting an event there. It's one of their nightlife events. And it's going to be Maker Faire related. We'll be there. We hope to see you there.
And there's going to be events all over the Bay Area the week ahead of time for the Week of Learning. So check out your local maker spaces, your hacker spaces. There's going to be events with at companies and talks and workshops and all kinds of great stuff.
Yeah. And of course, if you can't make it to Maker Faire, you're in luck, because DigiKey is also sponsoring the live stream from that event. And I do everything I can to make that show as good as being at Maker Faire as possible without actually having to be there. So you will see that on this channel here on YouTube, on our Facebook page, the same place you're seeing it there. So keep an eye out for that, and you'll be able to see as much stuff as I can cram into that show as possible. And that's a really fun show to produce. So if you can't make it out to Maker Faire, I try to make that be the next best thing. So be sure to check that out.
And I think we're going to have John play us out.
Yeah. John, before we let you go, before you have you play out, where can people learn more about what you are doing?
You can head to my site, which is jpixel.net, jpixl.net, and that'll spray you out to all my Twitter and Instagram and everything else, some YouTube. And I do a lot of stuff on Adafruit. So if you head to the Adafruit website, blog, learning channel, and on the YouTube channel, you'll see a playlist of all my stuff. I do a regular live stream every Thursday at 4 o'clock East Coast time. Is that right? Did I make that up? Yeah, that's right. And I always build something. Today I built a tiki idol that's a password vault. So you can tune in then and check it out. And if you don't mind, I'll plug one thing, which is 2 weeks from now, I'll be doing the live unboxing of AdaBox 07. AdaBox is our quarterly subscription box with lots of goodies and lots of projects that are around a certain theme. So this is our 7th one. It's AdaBox 007. So there's a lot of cool spy stuff for you to check out. So take a look on your internet for that.
Good call there. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And
thanks for having me. I'll play some music.
Awesome. And thank you for watching and joining us here. We'll be back with you in a few more weeks with another skill builder for the next project. We're not ready to talk about what that is just yet, but we will let you know soon. And let you know, and we'll dig in deep into the skill set around that particular project, and then in May we'll actually go ahead and start building that project. And then we'll be at Maker Faire. And yeah, so we hope to see you all there. We'll hope to see you with the next one of these live streams. Keep an eye out for YouTube for cool stuff there. And thanks for watching. Thanks for being with us.
remember what I told you.
Yeah, don't make eye contact. He takes it as a personal challenge.
Hello? Pat?
Yes.
Can I get a,
He'll take a Raspberry Pi 3.
No pie for you.
Told you. Hey, but I did hear there's a new deli. I can go pick up the sandwiches.
Don't be held hostage by the board order. Go to digikey.com to find thousands of boards in stock, all ready for immediate shipment.